The United States and Europe are united in trying to punish Iran for its threat to stability, but it's useful to recall how isolated they are, the U.S. and Europe. So the non-aligned countries, that's most of the world, 120 countries, they've been vigorously supporting Iran's uranium enrichment program for years. In the region, as I mentioned, Arab public opinion not only supports that, but supports development of Iranian nuclear weapons. The major regional power, Turkey, voted against the latest U.S.-initiated Security Council sanctions, along with Brazil, which is the most admired country in the South. Their disobedience led to pretty strong censure. There's an authoritative answer to what the Iranian threat is. It's given by the Pentagon and U.S. intelligence. Every year they provide an analysis to Congress of the global security situation. The last one, of course, dealt with the Iranian threat, and they explain what it is. They say, first of all, that whatever the threat is, it's not a military threat. Give some quotes. Iran's military spending is relatively low compared even to the rest of the region, let alone the Western powers. And Iran's military doctrine, they say, is strictly defensive, designed to slow an invasion and force a diplomatic solution to hostilities. Iran, they say, has only a limited capability to project force beyond its borders. With regard to the nuclear option, they say that Iran's willingness to keep open the possibility of developing nuclear weapons is a central part of their deterrent strategy. That's the military threat. The brutal clerical regime is undoubtedly a threat to its own population, but it hardly outranks Western allies in that respect. There is a threat, but it lies elsewhere, and it's ominous. One threat is Iran's potential deterrent capacity. That would be an illegitimate exercise of sovereignty, which might interfere with U.S. actions in the region. Incidentally, it's glaringly obvious why Iran would seek a deterrent capacity. Just look at the disposition of forces in the region and the constant threats to attack Iran by the global superpower in violation of the UN Charter, if anyone cares about that. In fact, when Iran tries to expand its influence in its neighbors, say Iraq and Afghanistan, that's called destabilizing. Iran is trying to destabilize the neighboring countries. That when the U.S. invades those countries, that's bringing stability. At the Nuclear Review Conference about a year ago, Egypt, which is chair of the 118 non-aligned countries, called for negotiations on a nuclear weapons-free zone, which had in fact already been agreed by the West, but hadn't done anything about it. International support for this was so overwhelming that President Obama was forced to agree formally. Washington informed the conference that it's a good idea, but not now. This isn't the time for it. Furthermore, the U.S. made it clear that Israel has to be exempt from any such nuclear weapons-free zone. And, of course, the United States, but that goes without mention. What Obama said is that, Washington said, is that no proposal can call for Israel's nuclear program to be placed under the auspices of the International Atomic Energy Agency or for release of information about Israeli nuclear facilities and activities. Okay, that takes care of that way of dealing with the Iranian military threat. Financial crises have been steadily increasing ever since the regulatory apparatus was dismantled since Reagan, pretty much. And there are good reasons for it. It's understood why a market system is going to regularly collapse unless there's regulation. Well, none of this is problematic for the very wealthy. They benefit from government policies. For the big banks and investment firms, which regularly create the crises, they come out richer than ever, as is the case now. The reason is they have an insurance policy, a government insurance policy. It's called too big to fail. So if they crash the economy, they can turn to the taxpayer to be bailed out. Meanwhile, proclaiming their love of free markets. And that's exactly what's happened. It's been a regular process since the Reagan years. Every crisis is worse than the last. The crisis is more extreme than the last, at least for the public, and not for those who created the crisis. So right now in the United States, unemployment is literally at depression levels for a large part of the population. But quietly, a few weeks ago, Goldman Sachs, one of the main architects of the crisis, which was bailed out by the public and is now richer than ever, they announced $17.5 billion in compensation bonuses for managers, and their director, the CEO, Lloyd Blankfein, received a $12.5 million bonus, and his salary was tripled. That's right at the same time that for the population, maybe 20% qualify for food stamps. Well, it plainly wouldn't do to pay attention to facts like these. Accordingly, propaganda has to seek to blame others, and so it does. You want to blame the vulnerable, of course. So one standard technique is to blame immigrants. That's constant in regular in an economic crisis. That's been true throughout U.S. history, even more so at times of economic crisis, and right now it's pretty common. Who exactly are the immigrants who are doing all this to us? Incidentally, this is exacerbated by a sense among the general population that their country is being taken away from them. And that's not entirely false. The white population is soon going to be a minority in the country, and people are aggrieved, not only by the economic crisis, but by the idea that their conception of what the country is, with them top dog, that's disappearing. Well, who are the immigrants? So where I happen to live, eastern Massachusetts, many of the immigrants are Mayans. They're fleeing from genocidal operations in the Guatemalan highlands carried out under Reagan. The consequences are still there. So they're fleeing to the United States. Immigrants are Mexicans, victims of NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. That was rammed through by Bill Clinton over strong popular objection, but the Clinton administration understood that it was going to lead to a wave of flight from Mexico. Mexican campesinos, peasants, can't possibly compete with highly subsidized U.S. agribusiness. Mexican businesses can't compete with U.S. multinationals, which have to be treated in Mexico like Mexican businesses. It's called national treatment. That works for businesses, but not for people. Like a Mexican person doesn't get national treatment in the United States, but General Motors gets national treatment in Mexico. Well, that's going to have obvious effects. Clinton understood it. And in fact, in 1994, same year as NAFTA, Clinton initiated the militarization of the border. It had been a pretty open border before. Border established by conquest, like most borders, and pretty much the same people lived on both sides, moved up and back, visit their relatives, and so on. But in 1994, the militarization of the border began because of what was clearly going to happen, and that led to a flood of desperate refugees, and also to rising anti-immigrant hysteria by the people who are the victims of the state corporate policies at home. Well, I don't have to tell you that much the same seems to be happening in Europe.